go back into 1 Kings, the 20th chapter, and I want to have you focus your attention on something for just a moment. And when John was reading it this morning, it was a little bit different reading. He was reading, I believe, from the New English Version. But I want you to go down 1 Kings 20 and go into verse 40. And while your servant, stop there on the word servant. Servant. Servant is one who has indentured themselves to another. A servant is one who looks to the best interest of the master. A servant is one who, for want of a better term, is dedicated. And so he said, your servant was busy here and there. He was gone. The man that I'd been entrusted with watching, that I vowed that if he got separated from me or I lost him, that it would cost me my very life. So while I was busy here and there, he was gone. But the reason I went back to that is because I wanted us to focus on the word servant. Because as Christians, we're bondservants of Christ. And as we talked about, we get busy here, there, and everywhere. And life presses on us. We begin to separate between that which is urgent and important. And we've had that discussion before. What's urgent, what's important? Urgent, I've kind of looked at as things that really don't matter in the long term. Something that's important would be, life-threatening or vital. Case in point, I'm struggling with the foot issue today. Linda told me yesterday that I needed to go to urgent care. And I looked up and called urgent care, and they told me 2-hour wait. And I go, no, I'm not waiting 2 hours. It's ridiculous. So I said, no. So buying through the definition, urgent care. They said, was it life-threatening? No, it's not. So by differentiation, urgent and important. If you have a life-threatening situation, don't call us. We're all about urgent care. You call 911 because you're in big-time trouble. Let them come and haul you away to the hospital. It's basically what they said. But see, in our life, we sometimes get things confused. And I'm not talking about medical care or whatever. We get confused about what's urgent, what's important. And we get busy here and there with things that, in the grand scheme, don't really matter. And we put ourselves in the greatest of peril. By the same token, as we talked about this morning, we oftentimes fail to really appreciate just how life is to be lived and life is to be enjoyed. But it doesn't mean we have to go into the realm of sin. But let's press on. So, have we forgotten our stewardship to Christ? We talked about it in class this morning. About we have been joined to Christ. I am the vine, you are the branches, out of John 14. And the necessity to produce fruit. Stewardship. We've been struggling for the past 3+ years with individuals coming back. I received an email from a friend, and I shared it with you. And I thought it was great because he was talking about how things seem to be coming back around. Attendance is on the upswing. Baptisms in the irrigation canal Another the same day in a pond. I know where he's talking about. I know where those things are in that location. I don't know that I would baptize somebody in an irrigation canal, but they were. In a pond, sure. But I guess it really doesn't matter. See, the Christians in the first century were getting themselves twisted and turned away. Hence the need for the book of Hebrews. And not forsaking your assembling together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's referring to the destruction of Jerusalem, that as far as the day. That very well could be. But the gist of the passage, as is the habit of some, talking about gathering together. The gathering together that's been put upon us as Christians since the day of Pentecost is the assembly on the first day of the week. And they had gotten into the habit of just not being involved. Gotten involved elsewhere. Busy here, there, and elsewhere. But you know, it's not just that. We've gotten too busy and we failed to take time for the things that are really important. On the overhead, you can see to take time in the simple things of being a child of God. For those that are stronger, bearing the weakness of those without strength. Bearing the burdens out of Galatians 6. And it's not talking about what some of you did yesterday, helping little Austin and Heidi. It's not what it's talking about, though I am appreciative you did that. And Linda and I both commented yesterday that I think that's the first time we've never actually lifted something to help somebody move. I think it is. That somebody had a need and we lifted not one box. We didn't put anything on a hand truck. And it was the first time. But did we bear their burden? There's a lot of burdens that we can carry. A lot of ways we can help one another. But sometimes we get too busy to do even that. Do you realize, and this struck me, do you realize that on average, we spend 444 minutes a day looking at either television, our smartphones, computers, or tablet. 444 minutes a day. That comes out to 7.4 hours per day. 2,711 hours yearly, or about 112 days. Now, just drive around town. You'll see people walking, enmeshed in their screens. So I wonder if, as Christians, we've gotten too busy enraptured with our screens that we've gotten too busy to pray. We're told to pray without ceasing. Are we too busy to pray? Are we too busy to bear one another's burdens? I'm proud of those that came down and helped yesterday. I really am. I was with you in spirit while my foot was soaking in ice. But I was there with you, believe me. But there are other ways we can bear one another's burdens. And while I was at home, I did. I engaged in communication with somebody who was having some difficulties. That's bearing burdens as well. Too busy to be of a strength. To offer your comfort to one who has weakness and they've expressed it. Too busy to break free and embrace the mindset that a Christian is supposed to have. We quote from Romans 12. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect, that you may prove. So in class this morning, we were talking about proving. Who do I need to prove my relationship with God with? And I said, me. I've got to prove it to me. And by proving it to me, I prove it to God. By proving it to me, I prove it to you. I need to continually be about that process of proving it over and over again. I know the day that I got married, the officiant asked me, love, honor, cherish. I affirm that. Now, does that mean that I affirmed it once and I don't have to affirm it ever again? And most men will say, you know, I affirm it every day I go to work. Every day I do this. Every day I do that. That affirms it over and over and over again. Is that sufficient? The answer is no. It's not sufficient. We have to constantly be proving it over and over and over to solidify and make that relationship that much better. The same is true with our relationship with the God of heaven. And we also have to do it with friends. Go back into the book of Proverbs. And we're going to go into the 18th chapter of Proverbs. And we're going to drop down to verse 24. A man of many friends comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Are you too busy for your friends? Are you too busy to interact with Brittany, Dolores, Janice? Well, Janice, I understand. But are you too busy? Too busy to call Joy to check and see how she's doing? She's there all by herself. And she probably starves for somebody to talk to. What about young Greg? Trying to make it on his own in a big, ugly, nasty world. Removed from his parents. Removed from family. And I'm talking to me right now. When was the last time I gave Greg a call? Tried to build more of a connection. See, that's what I'm talking about. We get busy, so busy, here, there, and everywhere, that we fail to really fulfill what we're called upon to do as Christians. I'm encouraged to hear about the things Austin has done, the challenges he's set forth before us. I need those kind of things. But I also realize that separate and apart from doing those things about personal evangelism is the work that we do within the congregation. I was glad to hear of so many visitors, friends that came to Joy's the other night. It's great. The interaction, we need that. We need the interaction between one and another. If we're going to grow, it is by developing these relationships and having that relationship begin to spiral out. I was thrilled, and I very rarely use that word, to learn that Austin's friend Henry, who is here, Henry's a member of the church who would like to move here, looking for a job here. And now we're getting to know Henry. And I was excited, thrilled to hear that Ralph spent so much time talking with them. See, I have my spies out everywhere. I know all things that go on. But I was glad to hear that. Those connections need to be made. And it is amazing what a little bit of kindness and interaction can do. And we need to be doing it. But we can't get too busy elsewhere because we need to take that time. How many of us have become busy here, there, and elsewhere, and we've lost our family? Ephesians, the 6th chapter, talks about it. Talks about our children and the responsibility we have. Proverbs 22 and verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. In the bulletin this morning was an article that I wish could have been a lot longer. But it was short. It was 700 to 800 words long. But it was talking about a responsibility we have to our children. It was talking about things that were said societally. And we need to be fighting to pull our children back. And the statements being made with regards to our children. And people discount them. Oh, they don't really mean that. Yeah. I take people at what they say. And if they're making statements like I put in that article, which were documented, then we need to stand up and be counted. Because they are coming for our children. And they're coming for our children in a number of different ways. Whether it be LGBTQ+, or whether it be some other secular realm trying to come for our children. It's not just transgenderism and the Rainbow Coalition approach, but they're coming for our children. And we can't get busy elsewhere. We have to spend the time with them. We have to interact with them. And we can't be busy elsewhere. Same is true with our grandchildren. We live so far from our grandchildren. Linda and I regret that we haven't had more time to spend with them. One lives in Florida. Several live in Florida. Others live in Washington. Here we are in California. We look back at our children. Where did we, what could we, how could we have? Were we busy elsewhere? I don't know. I know back in those days I was conducting a lot of gospel meetings. Was I much? I don't know. I can't go back and change it. But I can share now with others my laments and challenge them. Don't do what I did. Because maybe that was wrong. Oh, and I thought I was doing right. People call, we need a gospel meeting. I'll be there. When do you need me? And I would hold 6, 8, 10 a year for several years. And I'd be gone, leaving Linda with the kids. So I challenge you. Don't get busy here, there, and everywhere and lose sight of the kids. But by the same token, go to Ephesians 5 and don't get busy elsewhere and forget about your spouse. There is a growing number of individuals who are separating, divorcing after 25 years of marriage. And I mean, you did 25 years. I mean, you've already put in your time. The rest is supposed to be gravy. But a lot of people wake up and they look across the table with no kids there and they go, ah! And I know I've told you that before. But that's what they do because they haven't taken the time to develop that relationship. So in Ephesians 5, Paul talks about it. He talks about how the husband and wife are supposed to interact and about how the husband is to have such an ardent love for a spouse. That takes time. That takes energy. You go back to the Song of Songs, Song of Solomon, and that book tells you how to maintain that love, have it kindle again, because love doesn't die. Love needs to be kept alive. And it should not diminish after 25 years, after 40 years, after 50 years, after 60. Do you realize how long Betty and Joe Bridges have been married? I think we're getting close to 60. I think. I remember their 50th, but years get by. But it's amazing how time passes. So don't get busy elsewhere. Spend time with your family and develop it, even as the scriptures say. Time does get by. Time does fly by us. And congregationally, we can get busy elsewhere. And sad. It's so sad. But before we talk about the congregation, there's another thing that like that we can leave to our children is not stock portfolio. It's not gold and silver. But it is the legacy of a life well lived. That's what's important. I don't know Leroy Goodwin, what he left behind. I know he was a very humble man, very sincere man. And he passed away. He was one of the elders at the Coburg Road congregation in Eugene. Magnificent man. He was a simple farmer. But when he passed away, it impacted everyone. And everyone that I've ever talked to who knew him talks glowingly about him. We were in Clovis earlier this year, and there was a young man there by the name of Goodwin. And something about him just kind of struck me. And it turns out that it was Roy Goodwin's great-grandson, who is one of the preachers now at the Clovis congregation. And he was talking to me in glowing, flowing terms about his great-grandfather. He had never met him, ever. But yet Roy Goodwin's legacy continues to live on. And what they talk about is his faithfulness, his love for the God of heaven. And when I pass from this life, I want my sons to know that no matter what, the most important thing was my relationship with God. Silver and gold have I none, but what I do have, I give to you freely. It's what Peter and John said to the man there by the road. And so that's what we need to do. We need to put the emphasis on the life that we're living. So now let's look congregationally. Apologize for the little bit of a uh, overlap in the overhead. But congregations need to realize that they too can get busy elsewhere, can get busy putting a emphasis where that's really not important, and miss sight of Jesus Christ and Him crucified. That's what this is all about. In 1 Corinthians, the second chapter, you go in there and you notice what Paul wrote to the brethren there in Corinth. And he said to them, in all honesty, he said, when I came to you, I was in weakness, in fear, and much trembling. And why wouldn't he have been? Paul had been driven out of Thessalonica, ended up by himself in Athens. Paul hadn't been by himself for a long, long time. Have you ever been in a strange city after having difficulties leading up to it? And now you're alone? And so Paul said, I was with you in weakness, fear, much trembling. But look at verse 2 of the second chapter, 1 Corinthians. I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. That's what we should be all about. Jim D'Arcy mentioned it in class this morning about the need to preach Christ. And yes, I agree with him. But also there needs to be the teaching of other things to keep us in relationship to Christ. We have to have a balanced approach. The relevancy of the scriptures remains true. Scriptures are as relevant today as they were 100 years ago, 1,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago. The relevancy of the scriptures are there. But we need to be teaching Jesus Christ and Him crucified. But sometimes we get a little bit sidetracked with that. Had one individual who decided that the thing that needed to be preached was not Jesus Christ and Him crucified, but marriage, divorce, and remarriage for 6 months in a row. And that's what he was preaching. Now, I'm conservative on it. But 6 months in a row? No. And as a result, the congregation, 130-ish, had diminished down to 60. People just got, but there was tunnel vision. Got busy elsewhere and could only see this. We have to have a full approach, the full panorama of what the scriptures teach, with the central core of Jesus Christ and Him crucified. We have been entrusted with the stewardship of the gospel, and we need to utilize it to the best of our ability. Now, that doesn't mean we shy away from teaching the truth on subjects that are hard, i.e., MDR. But you deal with them and you move on. And you come back and you begin to present the whole gospel of God. We know that when Paul wrote to the Thessalonians, he told them he was proud of them in so many words. I have no need to tell you about spreading the gospel. And they did it. They did it. In 1 Corinthians, Paul told them about the need for one another. You have a need. For by one Spirit we were baptized into one body. And then he goes on saying, we're like pieces of the body. Which one can you say you can get away without having? You need each other. The building up of the body of itself in love. And so we can't get busy elsewhere because that's what we want. See, King Agrippa in Acts 26, he was so close to obeying the gospel. He told Paul, he said, you almost persuade me to be a Christian. What held him back? Was it his political dealings? Was it worrying about how people would view him? I don't know. But you almost persuade me. In Matthew 19, the young man who came to Jesus and said, Teacher, what good thing shall I do that I might obtain eternal life? And Jesus told him, you've got to love God more than the things of this life. There was a predominant love of that man. But basically what Jesus was saying, are you willing to put me first? Are you willing to embrace the concept of stewardship and then be a good steward in all that you do? We started this morning by singing songs about heaven and about wanting heaven, longing for heaven. But my question as I leave you now is, are you too busy for heaven? Are there other things that kind of tantalize you that you want to grasp? When I mentioned this morning that the way Ricardo makes a living is by distraction, he nodded his head in agreement. He agreed. Why wouldn't he? That's what he does. That's what he does. I won't tell you anymore, but that's what he does. And that's exactly what we face in life. I'm not saying Ricardo's a bad man, because he's not. But what life throws up at us is distractions. And by looking at the distractions, we lose sight of what's really important. So you've got this life to live. You've got this life to prepare for that which is to come. So all I'm trying to point out to you, don't get yourself distracted that you put your soul in danger. Like the man in 1 Kings 20. He put his life in danger because by his own admission, I was a servant to you, but I got busy here and there, and now I stand before you. I don't want to do that on the day of judgment. Lock in, do what you need to do, enjoy life. It's not a shackle. It's not a burden. You can enjoy life. You can have the fullness of life. And how blessed that is. How blessed it is. Heard somebody on the news the other day talking about how young people now are saying, oh, we don't need to get married. Commitment can be just cohabitation. And we've already determined to live with one another. And that's going to be accepted. We don't need the paper. And one of the people on the panel pointed out that he had been married over 25 years. And if he had it to do all over again, and he left it as a pregnant thought, he said, I'd do it all over. The key is choosing the right partner. Ephesians 5 talks about how we're wed to Christ. Is there any partner that's better than he? I leave you with that. If there's anyone that might be subject to the invitation, whether it be in regards to putting Christ on in the waters of baptism, which in a kind of an interesting book, LaGard Smith wrote, Baptism, the marriage ceremony for a Christian, kind of interesting. But if you need to put Christ on in the waters of baptism, to be clothed with Christ, we can do that. Maybe you need the prayers of the congregation for strength or encouragement. Any way we can be of a spiritual service.